So in this second part, my expertise is not I'm not a master of Vedanta or the Upanishads. I do read them, and I read commentaries and comments and talks on them, and so my knowledge of the Upanishads stems from there. I do have some expertise in the brain, since that is my life's work, so I can speak more authoritatively on that aspect of it. So my work has been made much easier by the excellent talk that Dr. Adiram gave. But let me go to this. So Dr. Adiram explained, how our scriptures are written. He also explained the parts of the Vedas, right? The Samhitas, which are the mantras and the hymns, right? And I'm going to try and not use a lot of Sanskrit language because because I'm not myself proficient in that language, and B, I feel that a lot of the audience may not be proficient just like I am. So I will try not to use a lot of those. The problem is that when we convert some words from Sanskrit to English, there is no equivalent word. And so that's where I will try and point that out to you. So the Samhitas and the Brahmanas are more of the ritual and the explanation of the ritual aspect of the Vedas. The Aranyaka essentially means forest dwelling. So when you go to the forest and you dwell in the forest and you meditate or contemplate on the teachings, that is Aranyakas, right? So the spiritual part really starts in the Aranyakas and then obviously reaches its prime in the Upanishads. As Dr. Adiram said, Upanishads, as he beautifully explained, consists of 3 different syllables, right? Upa, which is near. So, we are physically sitting near. Upanishads are not things that are taught to hundreds and thousands of people over a loudspeaker. That's not where the Upanishads come from. So it has been stressed. All of us are sitting near. It's a physical proximity that is definitely there. There's also a philosophical part of it, but it's physical proximity which we have, right? Then he talked about shad, sitting, right? Sitting physically and also your mind sitting, right? Your mind is calm. How is that achieved? Now you would see that a lot of rishis and yogis, when they start any of their talks, they go through a series of mantras. The role of the mantra is to sit your mind down. Right? As you saw, Dr. Adiram started with mantras, ended with mantras, right? So it is always the right thing to do is to start with a mantra. So we will use a very often used mantra for that purpose of shad, right? So those of us who know the Gayatri mantra, which I'm sure most of you do, please say that. Om Bhur Bhuvaswaha Tatsavitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodaya. So it is not just the act of saying the mantra is used to calm your mind down, which is an essential part of doing the Upanishad teachings. And the last or the third syllable he had talked about was ni, sitting below. Why do we need to sit below the Guru? Because we have to be receptive to his teaching, right? I'm reminded of a very common, a very famous Zen story, where a Zen master is sitting and a professor from a university comes. I can joke about professors because I'm one myself, right? So he comes in and he says, I need to learn meditation and Zen from you. And he says, okay, sit down, asks for coffee or some drink to come in, and he takes the pitcher, right, and pours the drink into the professor's glass, and pours, and the drink is overflowing, and it's overflowing, and the professor gets up and says, what are you doing? This is overflowing. And he tells the professor, that is why I cannot teach you, because you are already overflowing. right? You have to be empty and receptive to my teaching, then only you can receive it. Otherwise, you cannot receive it. That is the knee part of this, right? Unless the knee is there, there can be no reception. So let us see how much we know and how much we don't know. What do we really know, right? And this is again from a neuroscience perspective. So, genetics, big part of what we do today, big part of therapy, it's medicine. But a lot of people don't know this. Only 1.2%, literally just over 1% of the genome is what we know about, because that is the part that forms proteins and affects cells as we know it. We only know 1.2% of the genome. Right? 98.9% of genes we call junk DNA. The scientific term actually is junk DNA. Well, very recently we've learned that if you take away this junk DNA, the person cannot stay alive. So it is obviously not junk, right? But it tells us that we do not know almost anything about 98.8% of our own genes. We have no knowledge currently, right? And we are espousing ourselves as great knowers of genetics. We don't even know enough about the 1.2%. That's where all the research is, right? 98.8% we have not even touched. That is the reality. Dark matter and dark energy, right? Making up the universe. 68% of the universe is dark energy and 27% is dark matter. So 95% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy, right? About which we know literally nothing. We do know what it is not, but we do not know what it is. It is only the 5% of matter and energy that we are knowledgeable about, right? So that is what we claim to know. That is the visible parts of the universe. And even there, how much we know is still very limited, right? Because we know we have a solar system, we have a galaxy, and then we have the universe, but there are, billions of stars within galaxies, and then many galaxies within the universe. So our knowledge of actual creation is less than 5% at this point in time. A particle in existence, neutrinos, right? This is a very small mass particle that has no charge, right? And we know very little about it, except we do know that 100 trillion of these particles are going through our bodies every second. So can you imagine? 100 trillion particles are going through our body, and we have literally no experience of that, and we know very little about that particle. So, in a nutshell, we do not know 98.8% of our genetics, nothing about that. We don't know 95% of what makes the universe, and we do not know anything about this particle that is constantly going through our bodies, right? So our knowledge is extremely limited, and that is the knee part of the Upanishad. When we realize how little we know, it sort of provides that receptivity, that receptacle that can take that knowledge. So hopefully we are there. Now, the Upanishad talks about reality, and I'm going to use this to move. I'm only going to talk about one Upanishad, the Mandukya Upanishad, right? I would actually say that the Mandukya Upanishad is an excellent text of neuroscience, science of your brain, right? So I'm going to focus on that. Your brain creates your reality. Why do we say that? Your sense organs determine how you perceive the world. What do I mean by that? Like your hearing. Human hearing is between 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz. There could be a whole orchestra playing above 20,000 hertz. We are all deaf to it. Right? Remember the dog whistle? That we can't hear, but the dog experiences it. Right? So our perception of sound is only in a certain frequency range. Beyond that, we do not understand sound at all. Vision. Our entire visual spectrum is Vibgyor, red to violet, right? Infrared, we have no idea. If our visual spectrum was infrared, days would become nights and nights would become days for us. Right? Our whole system would change. So what we have constructed as reality is so dependent on our perception through our sense organs, which have a very limited spectrum. That's all we can see. We cannot see anything beyond that. And I'm going to try and show you some of these visual illusions, right? Where I can demonstrate right here, right now, what is the limitation that you have, right? So if you look at these lines, they seem that they are crisscrossing, right? But if you follow any line, you will not find any point of crossing. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. It's your visual system that is playing tricks on you. So I'm just trying to show you the limitation. If you see this, you might see bars and crosses, right? Now if you try and narrow your eyes a little bit, you'll see the word, bad eyes, right? So unless we tell you this, it becomes difficult. This, in this lit room, may not be possible, or maybe. If you look at this red dot here, right? Focus on that red dot and these rings will disappear right in front of us. Right? So can you see the limitation of your visual spectrum? One more. If you look at this, the ring seems to be moving, right? And this is a static image, right? Why is this? Why does this happen? Because your brain predicts reality based on past experience. Your brain literally predicts reality for you. It's not how it is how your brain is interpreting. I could have done the same thing in sound, where I can make you listen to a few syllables and you will not make anything out of it, and then I can share the whole sentence and you will make absolute sense of that syllables. So it is that kind of thing. It is pretty big, because this experiment, where you have an artificial arm. So the person has this hand, and this hand has a screen, so he cannot see his left arm, and you put an artificial arm right here. He knows it's an artificial arm, right? But he can only see that. And when you touch the arms, right, and suddenly you bring, say, a fork and try and put it in this artificial arm, they'll be taken aback because they think it's their real arm, right? Something that is so simple and there. Let me show you an example of motor, your motor control, your movement, right? All of you are sitting in a chair. Please keep sitting in the chair. What I want you to do is to put your legs down, right? Uncross them, put your legs down, and I want you to move your legs in a clockwise direction, like this. Your right leg in a clockwise direction. Okay? While you're doing that, write the number 6. Right? It is impossible to do that. We in neuroscience don't know why it is impossible to do that. Right? So what we have created as reality is very limited by our very limited sense organs. And we think that is reality. But this is actually helping us explain that reality is probably much different and much bigger than what we are perceiving by our very limited sense organs. Right? Another concept that I wanted to introduce shows us the limitations. So, if I ask you to look at this picture, you would think, focus on it. You would think your eyes are fixed, right? But if I put a high definition camera on your eyes, right, you'll see that your eyelids are moving. They're darting about everywhere. Micro movements. You are unaware of it. So I can really fix your eye. It's a technique called retinal stabilization. The name is not important, but I can fix your eyes. If I fix your eye, within few moments, you will turn blind. You will see nothing. Why? Because your brain interprets change in input as input. If the input is constant, the brain interprets that as no input at all. Now, why would the brain do that? The brain does that because if, say, you get damage to your balance organ, right? So what is happening? From your balance organs, you're getting an input of 100 each. Suppose one side's damaged, it's 50, the other side's 100. You interpret that as dizziness, right? But over a period of time, your brain says this difference of 150 is constant. It interprets that as no input at all, and you recover from dizziness. Right? But think about this. If there was something in our environment that would not change by movement of your eyes, is so large that it would not change in any way by movement of your head or your eyes, you would be blind to it. Is that clear? If there was a constant sound in the environment, right, that does not change in pitch, frequency, or anything, volume, you would be deaf to it. Because that's how our brains are engineered. So before we start on the journey of Vedanta, it is important for me to discuss with you what the limitations of our perceptions, sense organs, and the brain is, right? Otherwise, we are so supremely confident, we see, we know, this is how it is. This is important for that reset of the knee in the Upanishad. Before we move on to the Vedanta, this is the last concept I wanted to introduce. It's called the readiness potential. One of the most controversial things in neuroscience. What is the readiness potential? We put electrodes on your scalp, right? And we are recording your brain waves. And we tell you, tap the table in front of you, this table, 3 times in the next 10 minutes. Now, you don't know when you're going to tap the table in the next 3 minutes. I certainly don't know when you're going to tap the table. But I can tell you're going to tap the table because moments before you think you're going to tap the table, I get a potential. That's all this readiness potential is. Why is it so disconcerting? It is so disconcerting because I can tell what you are going to do before you know you are going to do it. So what is this telling us? That an electrical impulse has started in your brain. It reaches a certain place and you take ownership. I am going to do it. And then the thing happens. But who starts that electrical impulse? Right? This calls into question the whole concept of free will upon which our entire legal system is based. Our society is based on free will. But is this free will where the electrical discharge is already started, we are unaware of it, and then momentarily we take ownership, and then it happens? Right? Now we can see it in the science of the brain. So our whole sense of reality is very limited. And even the actions we perform may not be something that we have complete control over. Hopefully this explains the knee part of the Upanishad. Right? So let's move on. Upanishad and Vedanta, as Dr. Adiram discussed, this is the end of the Vedas, the last part of the Vedas, so physically and spiritually too, right? Often these are in the form of dialogues, like Nachiket and Yam, as he had explained in there. These are, consciousness is the principal inquiry in the Upanishads. Self-inquiry into the self, which means inquiry into consciousness, is the principal inquiry in the Upanishads, right? And in fact, they have this word called Prajnanam Brahma. The consciousness is Brahman. The Veda itself, the Upanishads itself tell us, consciousness is Brahman. So that's how they are defining consciousness, right? And we'll see when we get to the neuroscience of consciousness, we define it differently. They define it differently. So it's important to understand the differences. The Mahavakyas, right? The Upanishads are about self-inquiry. So they have these Mahavakyas, right? Where you get into the 4 essential questions that Dr. Adiram talked about. Aham Brahmasmi, right? I am Brahma. you and I are Brahman, right? I am Atma Brahman. The Atma is Brahman. Right? So these Mahavakyas sort of help us understand these concepts. Now you have heard this term, and a lot of terms that we have heard in our daily lives, in the temples, in our pujas, or even in our daily interactions, come from the Upanishads. Right? Sat Chit Anand is a term that almost everyone must have heard who has read any text in Sanatana Dharma. What is Sat Chit Anand? Sat is absolute non-changing truth, right? Which is Brahma. Chit is consciousness. Now, there are two ways to look at Chitta. There are two definitions of it. One is the Vedic kind of definition, which says that these are impressions of past lives, of several lives are in the Chitta. But the yogic definition of Chitta is consciousness. Okay. Anand is bliss. Anand is joy or bliss. Right? So what is the meaning of all this? The meaning is that Sat can be known only through Chitta. Consciousness has to be focused on to know Sat, which is God. So God is the English language term we are using for Brahman, right? Or that supreme consciousness. So, Chit, through Chit we can know Sat, and when we know Sat, we are in bliss. Do you understand that? Through Chit we know Sat, and by knowing Sat we are in Anand. That is the meaning of these three words that are there in this. Now let's move on to the Mandukya Upanishad. Right? Mandukya Upanishad, there are two stories about how it came about. One is Rishi Mandukya had something to do with this Upanishad and collected it. The other is that Mandukya comes from a root word in Sanskrit which means the frog. Why the frog? Because the frog comes as an egg, a tadpole, and then a frog. So the metamorphosis, the change, is what is being indicated by Mandukya, right? As Dr. Adidam told you, there are 12 verses in this. So in a single page, you can write the 12 verses of the Mandukya Upanishad, right? It has two basic parts to it. One is consciousness, states of consciousness, and the other is the Om, the Prana Mantra, right? Those are the two parts of it. So we will discuss both parts separately in this. The most famous karika or commentary that was written on this 12 verses is by Gaudapada Acharya. Gaudapada Acharya has written the most authoritative karika commentary on this. Who was he? He was the teacher. So he was Adi Shankaracharya, who we are more familiar with. Adi Shankaracharya's teacher's teacher was Gaudapada Acharya. He wrote this karika in Badrinath. Right? And Adi Shankaracharya has commentary on the Mandukya Upanishad too. But he also quotes Gaudapada Acharya's karika. So that karika is of tremendous significance if one has to read this. One interesting thing is that when Lord Hanuman asked Lord Ram that tell me the way to moksha, the jnana of moksha, Lord Ram says the Mandukya Upanishad alone is sufficient for moksha. And if that is not sufficient, then I have to tell you 100 more Upanishads that you will have to study. But in these 12 verses is deliverance, according to Lord Ram. So, what are these verses, 12 verses all about, right? The first, and to some degree the second, are about Om and about self, right? So that's that. Then the next 5 verses are about the states of consciousness. So we'll go into some measure of detail. And then the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th are about Om. and the syllables that Dr. Adidam briefly discussed with us, right? So let's look at it, and then we will go into the neuroscience of it, right? I don't want to go back and forth between neuroscience and this. We'll complete this, and then we'll go into the neuroscience of it, right? We're not going to read each and every verse on this, but the first one clearly talks about Om being the Nad Brahma Paramatman, or Om is Brahman. Doesn't say signifies Brahman. Doesn't say represents Brahman. Doesn't say it will take you to Brahman. It says Om is Brahman. It is important to get this because only in 12 verses the entire deliverance of human beings is being told to us, right? So that's what this is, and we'll come back to it, right? And then the self, it says, has 4 states of consciousness, right? So it is amazing that in so many thousands of years ago, they knew the states, because the time when we found out about the states of consciousness in modern neuroscience, we say that there are 3 states of consciousness: awake, dream or REM sleep, and non-REM sleep, which is dreamless sleep, right? We came to this in the 1950s. And by accident of a postdoc in Chicago who discovered REM sleep. His thesis was, as Dr. Adidam said, a PhD, his thesis was attention in children. As part of his attention in children, he saw that their eyes were darting about under their eyelids, right? So that's when we came to know about it. This is written thousands and thousands of years ago, right? It is amazing that they had this concept. So what did they have? They said that there are there are 4 states they talk about, right? The first is Jagrat Avastha, which is awake. And that's where the word comes in many Indian languages from Sanskrit, Jagrat or Jaga, that is all from this word Jagrat, right? Now it says, and I'm just going to read it, the English portion of it, right? It talks about Vashvanara. Let's keep that aside. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but it's important to understand, right? And it says it's the waking field, the consciousness, right? The consciousness, the prajna. The prajna is directed outwards. So you are experiencing the outside world. How are you experiencing the outside world? It says through 19 mouths and 7 limbs. But particularly the 19 mouths, right? Now, what are the 19 mouths? This is always, this is how the Upanishad says we are experiencing the outside world through 19 mouths. What are these 19 mouths, right? And it's important to understand because in a lot of scripture, they will talk about these 19 mouths, right? So what are the 19 mouths? How do we interact with the external world? The 5 sense organs, right? So we know those. Eyes for vision, ears for hearing, nose for smelling, tongue for taste, and skin for touch. So these are the indriyas. That's what we call the indriyas, the sense organs. This is what gives input. Then there are the 5 organs of action, karmendriyas. This is important enough because you're going to read this again and again and again, and it is important that we understand it, right? So the 5 organs of action are karmendriyas. So what are those? Hands for grasping, right? Legs for locomotion, moving, right? Tongue again for speech. So tongue was for taste, but here it's for speech, right? And then organs of reproduction and evacuation. The 5 karmendriyas. So it says these are the 5 organs of action. Then the 5 pranas. Right? What are the 5 pranas? Right? Udana, Prana, Apan, Vyan, and Saman. Especially as physicians, it's important that we understand this because it is so interesting to learn about these 5 pranas. Right? So let's take a little moment and try and see if we can learn a little bit about the pranas. So these are the vital air. There is no English word for it. So that is why I'm not trying to take an English word. There is no word for prana. right? Vital air is something we have come up with, but it's not accurate, but that's the best we have. So what are the pranavayus? The pranavayus are the 5 vital airs in the body, right? They affect different organ systems of the body, right? It's too small print for you to read, but that's what it is, right? And the most interesting part is that our rituals of death are based on the pranas. So what do I mean by that? Rituals of death. The samanavayu, right, which generates heat in the body, right? It goes away within 21 to 24 minutes. Right? So how do you determine someone is dead? In the non-medical sense, you touch them and if they're cold. Right? So the heat generation power has gone. Then the pranavayu, which is the breath. So you feel whether they're breathing or not, right? To make sure whether they're breathing or not. That also goes away within an hour or two, right? Then the apanavayu, right? This is the sensory, the twitching of the body that can sometimes happen even when a person has expired. Udanavayu, and then finally the vyana. The vyana goes by the 13th day. That is why in the death rituals you have the 13th day ritual. Right? Everything is based on this very scientifically formulated system that the Upanishads and the yogis have found, right? So that is why you have rituals for the first 13 days, because the belief is that you can still affect this person in some way, right? The recommendation in the Sanatana Dharma is to burn the body as soon as possible. That is why it is not recommended to wait for too long. And one of the first things they do is they tie the 2 big toes. Why do they tie the 2 big toes? The idea is that you close the Muladhara chakra, which is one of the Kundalini chakras, so that the death that has happened is final. Okay. So the rituals that are there are based on these concepts. There is a science behind it. It's not just ritual. But sometimes we forget the science and then the rituals seem aimless to us. Right? So that's the concept that is there. I'm sure any one of us who've had the misfortune of having a dear one, losing a dear one, have seen that these rituals have happened. Right? Let's go back. So, we've now explained 5 sense organs, 5 organs of action or karmendriyas, the 5 pranas. There are 4 left, right? For this to be 19. They are the antakaran, or your mind. So, in the mind or antakaran, there are 4 more. The man. What is the man? Man is basically where there are again 2 concepts here in describing the 4 types. One is the Vedic, one is the yogic, right? And I'm just going to go to the yogic part of it because that, like Dr. Adidam said, even reading the Vedas to a certain extent will only take you to a certain limit. It's the yogic meditation aspects that will actually take you beyond to actually realize God, right? Or self-actualization. So man is, what is man? Man is, by the Vedic concepts, is interactions, but from the yogic aspect, man is considered to be the storehouse of memories. And in the yogic aspect, it's not just memories of your lifetime, but they also have genetic memory. Other memories are also considered part of man. Right? Buddhi is intellect. It decides right from wrong, right? It's your intellect and how you go about doing that. Ahankara, we think in the Vedic sense it is thought to be ego or I, right? That is there. In the yogic sense, it is identity. So when in the Gurukuls, the students begin teaching students, the first thing they impact is ahankara, because your identity, right? If your identity is I am a person living in Omaha, your entire worldview will be determined by that. right? So they try and establish your identity first as a human being who wants to do good with all human beings. Because the identity is not established, you will use your intellect improperly. That is why in the Gurukuls, the identity, ahankara, was established first. Then knowledge was given, right? So you see the concept? And then chitta in the yogic philosophy is intellect unsullied by memory, right? Or consciousness, right? That's the concept. So this 19 mouths is how we interact with the world outside in your waking state. Is that, any questions about that? I really did not understand this very well, so I spent a lot of time trying to learn this, because this is going to come again and again in our scriptures. The 7 limbs is the 7 limbs of the cosmic entity, awake entity, right? So in this Upanishad, when they talk about states of consciousness, they talk about who is experiencing the state of consciousness. So you, but there is also a cosmic entity that is interacting with in the state of consciousness. So it makes it a little confusing, but we'll try and explain that, right? So the second is swapna, or dream state. And they say, now your consciousness is inward. Your consciousness is inward. But you're still experiencing this inward jagat, that is, through these 19 mouths and these 7 limbs. Okay? And then last is Sushupti, dreamless sleep, right? That is somewhat different, because in that, all of these, it is neither interacting with the outside world, it is neither generating dreams, so it's not interacting with the internal world. That is the time of bliss. That is not the time of Atma Sakshatkar. No, it is just bliss, because you're not interacting with the outside world or the inside world. That's what the Upanishad says, that is the time of consciousness and bliss. But you come out of it. Right? You do come out of it. So it's not something that is considered that. Now, Turiya is not a state of consciousness. Okay. Sometimes, as Dr. Adidam said, in Western scholars think Turiya is the 4th state of consciousness. No, it is not. Turiya is present during all times. Turiya is pure consciousness. It is pure consciousness. So it is present in all times. So if you were to look at it, it is present all through this. So if you look, this is Turiya. It is present always during Jagrat, Swapna and Sushupti. The names I've given is what you are called during these states, right? Vishwa is what you are called, right? Now the word Vishwa you don't find in the Mandukya Upanishad, but in the Karika of Gaudapada, you will find this word Vishwa, right? Swapna, Tejasa. Why Tejasa? Because it's self-illumined. You don't need light during your dreams, right? It is self-illumined. So that's Tejasa. You are called Tejasa during that period, right? And you're called Pragya during Sushupti. And the names that I've put here, these are the cosmic entities, which is Vaishvanara, Hiranyagarbha, and Ishvara. Now we use these words, Ishvara, Hiranyagarbha, but this is where it comes from. The cosmic entity is called this during this state of consciousness. Now Turiya is this, right? Now let's look at Turiya. This is the most important part of this Upanishad. It explains Turiya. It is explaining literally God, Brahman. No, you do not find this almost anywhere else, right? So let's go and try and look at it. So the 6th and the 7th, particularly the 7th verse, explains this. And what does it say? It essentially has a negative explanation about what it is not. Now I was puzzled by this. Why does it say what is it not? The Buddha, when he was asked, can you describe, you don't say a word about God. And therefore a lot of the world thinks that Buddhism is an atheistic religion. Right? Because the Buddha, when he was asked this, he clearly in his lifetime says, he says, when you cannot say anything about something, it is better not to say something about it. Because I'll be inaccurate. right? So this was obviously written before the Buddha's time, right? So what does it say? It says the Turiya in this consciousness is neither turned inward nor outward, neither awake nor sleep, right? It says that. Nor is it both inward or outward. So it's trying to rule out all the three stages, that it's not that, right? It's neither knowing or not knowing. This cannot be experienced through senses, and that is why we don't know. It is indiscernible, incomprehensible, and indefinable. Its sole essence being consciousness of its own self. Now, this is all a lot of philosophical tales. So here's how I liked in some of the karikas and talks that have explained this. So one is the three states of consciousness, and one is Turiya, which is always there, right? So the example that has been used is, think of gold, right? Gold. You can have a gold necklace, a gold earring, and a gold ring, right? Three states of consciousness: ring, necklace, earring. And then there is gold. Gold is Turiya. It is always there, right? So Turiya is the gold. The states of consciousness are just creations of gold, right? This, I thought, was one of the best ways to describe it. A modern saint has described it in a different way, which I thought was very interesting. He says, when you go and watch a movie, right, take a little kid with you, your child, and you're showing him a movie. And you get to the movie when the movie's already started. And you tell the child, you know, when we go to the movie theater, there's a giant screen, right? And so the child comes and sits with you and is watching the movie, right? And he says, and he says, where is the screen that you were telling me? And you say, see that? Oh, he says, you see the hero is galloping in the horse. Is that what the screen is? And he said, no, that's not the screen. Then he asks you again, where is the screen? And you say, look at the heroine. She's sitting on the, there, and you point it again. And he says, is that the heroine sitting on the chair? And she said, no, that's not what the screen is. And then he says, where is the screen? You haven't told me. He said, no, look, there's the screen. And he says, what is that? Is that the rain coming down in this? So the Turiya is the screen on which all things are happening, right? But for us to realize that screen on which the world is playing, right, there's a process to it, right? And that is what is explained in the Karikas. So hopefully this helped me understand this concept a little bit better than a lot of philosophical terms, that gold is the Turiya, the ornaments are the states of consciousness. The screen is the Turiya, the scenes are the states of consciousness. Turiya or supreme consciousness of Brahman is always there. Just realizing that it's there is difficult. So the entire Upanishad is pointing us to that. That is what it is not. So it's saying it is not the hero on the screen. It's not the heroine on the screen. It is not the table on the screen. Because if you've not seen the screen, how does it tell you that this is? But it tells you everything is playing on that screen. Okay. So that's the purpose of the Mandukya Upanishad. It is pointing us towards that screen, towards the goal, towards the underlying, everlasting Brahman. That's what it is trying to do. Right? So it's a negative explanation, as we talked about. I have tried to go word by word so that I can understand this in a words better, but we've already discussed that it's neither consciousness inside or outside, so I'm not going to go over all of them. Some of these words are very, very important, because they come in again and again through this. So this is one way people look at it. I consciousness and thoughts without thoughts. So Turiya is, there is consciousness, but there are no thoughts, right? That is Turiya, and that's a difficult stage to reach in this. There are also transitional stages that are talked about mainly in the Karikas and the commentary by Adi Shankaracharya. So they talk about, Unmani and Aladini and then Samadhi. Before Turiya, there is Samadhi, right? And we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but we'll go through it. And then we come to the last four about Om. So in the Mandukya Upanishad, they say Om actually has 4 syllables. It's not A, it's A. uma. So what is uma? So is literally something that comes from your nabhi. When you say if you were to say it even now, you'll see that the umbilical region is where it comes from, right? U is from your throat. Is when you close your lips, right? So it says we start with Jagrat Avastha. So is Jagrat, U is dream, is sleep, Sushupti, right? And then what is Turiya? It is the silence after that is Turiya, right? So when you do spiritual exercises, they actually make you say the word Om in this manner. And then there is a period of silence. That is where Turiya is. The spiritual exercises will make you do that. Some people also say the Anahat Nad, unstruck sound. Sound is usually produced by striking things, right? The Anahat Nad. Anhat, what is Anhat Nad? It's unstruck sound. It is sound that doesn't change. So if you look at our neuroscience example, if nothing changes, now the pitch, the frequency, the volume doesn't change, we would be deaf to it. But there are people in different parts of their spiritual progress that are constantly hearing this Anhat Nad. They also say that within you, when you're completely silenced, your mind is silenced, when you're in that silence, you will hear Om. Okay. So that's what this essentially tells you. I'm going to move to this. So the idea is, one question that is often raised by the rishis is, then if we have only pure consciousness, why is the need for creating human beings and other beings, right? Just have the pure consciousness, right? And there are lots of stories where Brahman, or Mahavishnu as sometimes referred to, wakes up, thinks about, becoming, two, so the dual nature is then created. But all of that is different. This was the best example I thought of that indicates the solution to us is this story, right? So this is a story about Swami Chinmayananda, right, from the Chinmaya mission. So he goes to a classically trained Brahman realized saint, and he asks him this question. The saint does not reply, right? Then the next day, in the Himalayas, Swami Chinmayananda is sitting there, and the saint is giving a discourse, and the saint says to Swami Chinmayananda, says, water. And so Swami Chinmayananda gets up, runs out, there's the Ganga, right, because this is in the Himalayan areas. He runs out, goes to the Ganga, gets a glass of water, brings it. Glass of water in the Himalayan regions of the Ganga is drinkable as opposed to some other parts. So brings the water to the saint, and the saint says, I said water. Water, what is this? So Swami Chinmayananda realizes, water by itself cannot be brought. You need a container so that water can be brought, it can be experienced, it can be useful in this material world. So what is he indicating? Pure consciousness by itself can only be experienced in a container, and the container is our bodies and mind, right? So then he gets that indication of how and why this is important, right? Because everyone comes up with this question, if only pure consciousness, why don't we just have that? Why do we need these beings? We need the beings because that is the container in which this can be experienced, right? So consciousness from a neuroscience perspective, and how does it relate to this? So consciousness, and I'm just giving you a very formal American Academy of Neurology definition of consciousness, is being awake and aware of oneself and surroundings, right? That is the neuroscience definition of consciousness, right? A person is awake and he's aware of himself and his surroundings, and he can interact with them. That is what this is, right? Now, people could say, that sounds like Jagrat, right? So, it is Jagrat to some extent. And we only have 3 states of consciousness: awake, sleep, and dream, right? Those are our 3 states. We have no concept of turiya, and that is something we would like to investigate, but we would need people who have experienced turiya or are in turiya or supreme consciousness, and then we can study them, and that's not available in the United States very, very often. So, as I said, this REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, which is when you dream, that we only discovered in the 1950s. Just for your knowledge, each one of you had 3 to 4 dreams last night. I can guarantee none of you remembers all the 4 dreams that you had last night. Right? Why not? Because once you move out of the REM sleep, the jerky eye movement sleep, right, you forget your dreams. The only ones that you remember is when you wake up during that REM sleep. Now, there are people who say, oh, I've never dreamt, I don't dream. No, everyone dreams. If you were to put EEG leads on you, discover when you are in REM sleep and wake you up, you'll vividly remember that dream. But we don't know what is the scientific purpose of dreams. If every human being on this planet is dreaming, there must be a biological purpose, and that's what we are missing. But that's not the big deal. We actually don't really know why you sleep in the first place. We had all kinds of conjectures, because if you keep an animal awake for a few weeks, they will die. So it is doing something of great value we till very recently did not know. The other is that your dream phases increase in length as you keep sleeping, right? So it's changing. We just don't know why it's changing and what's happening. So in our center, we're actually doing this study on dreams to really figure out, what do you dream in different parts of the night? Is there a pattern to it? And can we influence your dreams primarily to treat disorders, right? So that's a separate issue there. When you sleep, your sleep is influenced by light. Your light falls on the retina, right, in your eye. That then influences a series of brain areas that then release chemicals that puts you to sleep. Okay, so that's the concept here, and I'm not going to go into too detail. But what have we discovered as the role of sleep? Now we have discovered that during your sleep, you get this brainwashing. Your fluids around your brain, they actually go in these micro areas and they clean up all the toxins out of your brain, including the ones that cause dementia. Right? So we used to think if people with dementia don't sleep well, it may be the other way around. Because you don't sleep well, you're getting dementia. Right? Because the cleaning is not happening. We can see that the columns enlarge and it goes through. And the other is memory. Memory is formed by synapses. Brain cells come together. This, during sleep, you have some brain cells that become stronger and some that become weaker. Okay? So we have sort of learned that in this. But what about consciousness? States of consciousness. What about consciousness? Now we have learned that basic human consciousness, what we call consciousness, is between, this is the cortex of your brain right here, the upper thinking part. And this is the deep part, the thalamus. And you have these neural circuits formed by brain cells that are going from the thalamus to the cortex. If the oscillating frequency, the current oscillates at 3 cycles per second, right? You are unconscious, or in deep sleep, or the animal is unconscious. So some researchers have taken out these circuits in live animals, right? And if they turn the switch to 3 hertz, the animal falls unconscious. They turn the switch to 9 hertz, the animal wakes up. Right? So we found the essential circuit of consciousness as we know it. Right? And we can change it up and down. Based on this knowledge, we have moved a little bit further, which is we can now put in a deep brain stimulator and electrically alter your oscillating frequencies. And this has been used in a limited number to wake up people from coma. Right? Because we can change the oscillating frequency and the coma changes into awakeness. So these patients who were in like minimally conscious state, different names for different types of coma, minimally conscious state, they are able to now wake up, feed themselves, interact properly with the environment to some extent. More interesting than that was we have people who are certified in coma, right? They also have some brain damage. Some, not a lot, but some. And these people were taken into a machine called functional MRI. What is a functional MRI? Functional MRI is where we can see what areas of your brain get activated when you do something. And they were asked to play tennis, right? First, they took normal volunteers and mapped their brain to see when you play tennis, they asked them to play tennis, what areas of your brain get activated, in what order. And so we had that picture, right, which is right here. Normal volunteers, right? This is the pattern. This is a person in coma, 20-something-year-old who was in a coma. They're put in this functional MRI machine. They're not responding. But you tell them, imagine playing tennis. Same area of the brain gets activated in playing tennis, as did when they were in healthy volunteers. Then they say, imagine walking around the house. The same 3 areas that were activated in a normal person get activated in this person too. So that person is listening to you, is responding to you, and then they said, what is your name? Is your name Jane or Elizabeth? If yes means walking around the house, no means playing tennis. And so that person was now able to answer questions. Right? So we are learning human consciousness a little bit more than we had done in the past, right? But the concept is, how do we get to Turiya, the fourth state, right? Or the underlying consciousness. And that is where the challenge has been, right? They're thinking that your brain waves would slow even more than they are, right? Brain waves are between 0 to 12. They think your brain waves will either flatten out or go down below 0.5. But for us to study that, we will need someone who is in Turiya, or we can go get into that state, at will. And that is difficult for us to get here in the United States. But that is how this is being studied in this, right? The other thing is that when you stimulate the brain with a magnetic stimulator, right? So in an awake person, that stimulation then goes all around. That electromagnetic stimulation goes all over. But when you do it in sleep, when the person is not conscious, it stays localized to one area. It doesn't go to every area. Okay, so that has also teaching us a lot about this consciousness. The back of your brain is called the heart zone. This is the front of your brain, back of your brain. This area in the back of your brain is called the heart zone for consciousness. So a lot of work is being done. In fact, if you stimulate some of these areas, it stimulates desire. The person says, I have a desire to move my hand. We were never able to initiate desire. Okay, I will move on. I'll skip this blind side and go to Om. Okay. Om is the Prana Mantra, Nad Brahma Paramatman. It is the sound form of God. It is not an indicator to God, it is that, right? And in our scriptures, it says it is a vibration. It is a vibration, right? So if you look at some of the words that have been said, it says Pranav is Om. Om is God. Om is Paramatman, right? From there. This vibration is considered to be the start of everything is the start of creation. It is there in everything. This vibration is the fundamental particle. Swami Krishnanand of the Divine Life Society in 1973 wrote this, right? And he's talking about Om and the Prana Mantra, but look at his wordings. He says it is vibration, right? And it is there in all constituents. Everything has this. Vibration is the fundamental particle of existence, as our scriptures and this says. And now, in fundamental physics, we have the string theory, which says that the fundamental particle of creation is a vibration, and they call it a string. Right? Can you imagine thousands of years ago they would have said something like this? That vibration is the fundamental nature of creation. Om is that Prana Mantra. Right? But we want to study it scientifically. So we did, scientists have done these functional MRI studies, and what they have found is that there is less activation of certain areas of your brain, including the amygdala, which is the emotion center of your brain. That has been seen. Okay. Now again, not a lot of studies have been done with this, which is a shame, but a lot more can be done. They've also compared students saying the Gayatri Mantra versus a poem. Right? And what they found was that the net score improvement in cognitive tasks was more than 21% with Gayatri Mantra and only 4% with the poem. Okay? So these mantras is important. Another thing for us to remember about the mantras. In the mantras, in the Vedas, our Maharishis have said that the sound of the shlokas are more important than the meaning of the shlokas. In fact, they say there is extreme punishment if you are pronouncing and saying those words incorrectly. If you ever go to Kashi, right, and you go on the ghats, you'll see these young people being sitting there, right, with the mundak, head shaved, and they are doing the pronunciation of the mantras, and they're taking ghee and turning their tongues because they want it exact. That's why the oral transmission, because the sound is more important than the meaning. Therefore, writing was not that important. The oral tradition must continue because the sound is important. That is what we are learning here. So that's what we are getting. And lastly, the Sanskrit effect. Now we have studied that people who continuously chant Sanskrit mantras, parts of their brain like the memory centers in others, they are larger than in the others, right? And I'm going to cross this, I'm going to go to this. So, the last part, 5 minutes of this. Guru, right? What is Guru? As you know, the Sanskrit says, one who dispels darkness, right? How do they dispel darkness? As Dr. Adiram said, intellectual inquiry will only take you this far, and they say this is never going to give you an answer. It is a good one to do. It will put you on the path, but it's not going to give you the answer. The answer will come with meditation, right? And the gurus are giving you techniques. They give you a specific technique on how to do this, right? So Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's was transcendental meditation. Sadguru's is Shambhavi Mahamudra. He has others, but starts with this. Shri Shri's is Sudarshan Kriya. Shri M's is Kriya Yoga. Right? So all of them give you a technique to be on your way. But to get to that point, you have to read and the scriptures, you have to do the Gyan part of this and the Bhakti part of this before you can get there. Right? In the Mandukya Upanishad, the Swami Krishnanand again of the Divine Life Society said that the theme of the Mandukya Upanishad is the exposition of the mystic syllable Om with a view to training the mind in meditation. Right? Meditation is the means to achieve Brahman. Okay, so what do we know in modern neuroscience about meditation? Right? I put this word up there. I think everyone here knows about it. The Patanjali Yoga Sutra, the second shloka in the Samadhi Pad, it says, Chit Yoga Chitta Vitti Nirodha. The cessation, stopping the modifications of mind stuff is yoga. That is how you go into the Samadhi. Right? This is the opening page of the National Institute of Health here in the United States, NIH, right, in their Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, right? And they talk about this. They say that, and I'll show you these studies, not a really good large studies, but small studies have started to show that meditation can alter the structure of your brain. And it can alter the function of your brain. And the NIH says that it can slow, stall, or even reverse changes that take place in brain during normal aging. Right? This is the National Institute of Health that is saying that. So it is important to look at it, right? This is preservation of aging brain. So people were meditation, no meditation. The ones that did meditation, they did not have brain cell loss at that speed as the other persons did, right? Peacefulness. So when they did meditation, they had less anxiety, more peacefulness, measured scientifically, right? The first study I talked about, these are all from major academic, medical universities in the United States. Antidepressant effect. This was a Johns Hopkins study. The effect of meditation was just as much as an antidepressant in depressed individuals, right? And the volume changes in the brain. So here is the emotion center of your brain called amygdala. See, without meditation, how active it is, and with meditation, it's less active. The yellow means very active, right? So it really is changing not just the structure, but also the function of the brain through this meditation, right? Improves cognitive function. They've tried this in schools in California, and they found better results in academics and less problems with those children, right? This is the structure changing in the brain. So it can help with addiction. In fact, for smoking, they compared the American Lung Association technique for stopping smoking and meditation, and they were both equal, right? So that is kind of there. In pain, so meditation in pain. This is without meditation. The yellow shows active perception of pain, and you can see how much less it is with meditation, right? So now, we are learning these are biological parts to this, right? We also know meditation takes down your cortisol levels, which is your stress levels. That is how it's probably decreasing your blood pressures. So in the transcendental meditation, there have been a number of studies that have shown with TM that your blood pressure goes down, right? Now we are learning which chemicals may be responsible for that. So it changes the structure of the brain, right? Function of the brain and mood states through this. I'm going to go through this. Genetics. So epigenetics is, genetics are your DNA. Epigenetics is, to a primarily audience of Indian Americans, I always say, genes are your hardware, computer hardware, and epigenetics is your computer software. So epigenetics can switch on or switch off any gene, right? And yoga and meditation both can impact epigenetics. In fact, in a study, just 8 weeks of yoga intervention changed the epigenetic profile, right? And this is too small to read, but it's just a number of studies that are being done and have shown these changes there. What about meditation here in the United States, right? In the 12 months, they did a study from 2012 to 2017. The number of US adults that do regular meditation went up from 4.1% to 14.2%. 14.2% of the population does regular meditation. And in children aged 4 to 17, right? And Shashiji will appreciate this. It went up from 0.6% in 2012 to 5.4% in 2017. It's one of the fastest growing things that you can see in this, right? And lastly, the Brahma Muhurat, right? When should you do meditation, right? Brahma Muhurat it's the early morning hours when you are told to do meditation, right? Why is that? So when I was looking into this, it is interesting that in that early morning hour, you have melatonin. Melatonin is a chemical in your brain that comes out of the pineal gland. Melatonin is what puts you to sleep, right? Melatonin starts to decrease, right? And cortisol, which is your stress hormone, it hasn't gone all the way up. It is just starting. In that period is what they are calling the Brahma Muhurat, right? Because if you're not sleepy and your stress hormone isn't high, that is the time when you can meditate, right? So there is a biological basis to this. And it's fascinating that they would do. And the last slide is this. Recent study published in Nature, the major scientific publication of our time, right? They found that there are gamma waves in your brain. Certain frequencies of waves are called gamma waves, right? If you increase gamma waves in animal models of Alzheimer's dementia, what happens in Alzheimer's dementia? You get a lot of abnormal protein accumulation in your brain, right? If you increase gamma waves, they found, and they were doing this by flashing lights into the eyes, your certain cells in your brain called the microglia, they start eating up all the abnormal protein, the amyloid plaque. They clean it up, right? So we would like to have something that increases gamma waves. And what has been studied? meditation. The Brahmari pranayam also, but meditation, whether it is vipassana meditation or other types of meditation, that increases naturally your gamma waves. Right? So, I will end here. Hopefully, we have been able to share with you some of our understanding and some of the neuroscience aspects of Vedanta. Right? Thank you all for listening.